And did you feel a sense of closure when this was happening? Because some people may have said, well, you know they've died, let it go. But this very physical act of getting the different body parts together and then burying, did you see that psychological and emotional release?
In a way, yes. I mean, a lot of the families were somewhat relieved because until this point, they did not know where their loved ones were, whether they're alive or dead or where they could be. And to live in that situation of anxiety and anxious and not knowing where your loved ones are, is very, very crippling. So once they know even maybe 50% of the body is recovered and I'm burying it, it's a relief. And you can see that in people. I spoke to some of the families and they said, look, alhamdulillah, Allah has at least given us the body back and we've buried it. We've given a dignified burial. And alhamdulillah, in the presence of scholars and muftis all over Bosnia, you had about 70, 80 muftis from different cities and towns. Scholars and members of other countries come together. So it's a very fitting way of burying everyone. But I do believe it does bring some closure to the families after 16 years.
And at this commemoration, do you think it was important that people from the international community were there to witness this? You went from Britain, there were people from other parts of the world who went. Do you think that was quite significant?
I've been going to Bosnia for the last 6, 7 years, probably more, and I've taken different delegations, young, old, interfaith, charity and the such. This year we led 2 groups, about 23 people from London. And I've seen the presence of international, guests and dignitaries has increased. Last year you had the Turkish Prime Minister there, you had the US Ambassador speaking. This year, unfortunately...
And what kind of things are they saying then when they're present there? I mean, is there acknowledgement that this was ethnic cleansing, that this was a genocide, people were killed simply because they were Muslim?
Well, some are accepting that this was ethnic cleansing and this is wrong and they're condemning what has happened. But personally, I feel it's not strong enough. There needs to be more needs to be done. I mean, only 3 years ago or 4 years ago, when we went to Bosnia, we met the British Embassy in Sarajevo. And we said, why do you not recognize 11th of July as Memorial Day? They said, we can't because it's political. If you recognize this, the Serbs will attack us and say, why don't you recognize our side of the story? So we challenged them. So for the last 2-3 years, the Grand Mufti took it on himself to go to European Parliament and got it through for the European Parliament to accept it as a day of memorial. And since then, it's increased. The number of people from the international community have come, which is a good sign. But I still think it's not enough. A lot of it is PR. A lot of it is, yes, we accept what has happened. Let's try to move on.
So there's still politics.
There's still politics
going on. Do you think the arrest of Mladic will actually help untangle some politics because it's more clear now, or do you think that will still remain muddied?
I think this year it was also special because of the fact that Ratko Mladic was arrested at last, even though we feel that they probably could have done it a long time ago.
Yes, I mean, people, Pakistan has been criticised, how come Osama bin Laden was there, and yet Mladic, who has been in hiding all these years, and clearly people knew where he was, and it is only now, 16 years later, that the man was arrested. Is there a lot of bitterness about that?
There is a lot of bitterness, and people probably feel betrayed by that. I mean, as I said, they could have arrested him a long time ago, but I think they've done it for political reasons, and I think it was for the pressure of joining the European Union. I think they at last gave in and said, okay, we'll hand him in. And he's an old man now. I mean, and I don't know how much they can do with him. And but we'll have to wait and see what they actually, what judgment they pass on him. He's denying that he committed any genocide, but there's clear evidence, even on camera. He's saying that he's taking revenge on the Muslims. I mean, and there's a very powerful film that you can see in the museum, and they've got interviews of Ratko Mladic giving at that time to Serb television, where he's celebrating that he's killing Muslims. You see.
And of course, one of the shocking aspects of this massacre was that it took place under UN auspices, and we're finally seeing for a country accepting some responsibility that its troops did not intervene when they should have. Do you think that too is a significant marker in this chapter?
It is. I mean, back to your question about Ratko, I mean, some Bosnians are saying, look, it's good that he's been arrested now, but this is not the end game, because Ratko will deliberately try and prolong the whole proceedings. And that, in a way, kind of like reawakens and brings to light all the suffering people have suffered before and the memories. And that's quite hurtful for a lot of Bosnians. So they'd rather him not being arrested, or if he's arrested, he's put behind, bar quickly. So there's that element, psychology affects a lot of people, it hurts them.
How long is it predicted that this trial will
I mean, you saw last week he was refusing to accept the court, and apparently he was told to get out from the courtroom. So we fear it may go on for some time, and it'll just increase the anguish and the suffering of the Bosnian people. So that's the reality. But the other thing is, you have even today Serb soldiers who actually raped Muslim women, who kill people, who are now working as policemen in Sarajevo. And the Bosnian Muslims, they know who they are. And imagine you have to live in that society as neighbors or as someone's police officer who's done this. And there's no basic closure to that. You have people who are protesting outside Srebrenica, the memorial, the day after. It happened previous year also. So protesting against the whole memorial, saying this did not take place, the massacre did not take place. So
there is still a denial in some quarters?
They're still in a state of denial. Still.
They're not accepting the genocide took place, or they're not
They're
accepting...
even saying that some of the bodies were just made up, they're from other parts of the world. You're just getting body parts from different places. So there's a state of denial within the Serb community still. And some will know where the body parts are. They will not tell you unless you give them a hefty fee. So this is the reality, it's a business now. So knowing all this, imagine how it is like for a Bosnian Muslim who's suffered, who's lost everything to live in society.
Well, that was going to be my next question. Where 16 years on, people actually went back to the villages where people had been killed, ethnic cleansing had taken place. They are getting on with it. But what has that healing process been? Has there been a healing process, or is it still quite tense?
I think there is a process of healing. Despite what has happened, people are trying to live their dignified and normal life. They don't see a future in violence or another war. That's the last thing they want. But you can sense tense atmosphere in different places. That's the reality. And the current political structure is very, I can't get my head around it, very complicated. And so you find the political instability, as well as, because justice has not been done yet, because Serbs are still saying this did not take place, for people to live in a dignified and normal life, it's very difficult, for them to get across that.
So do you know of any truth and reconciliation type initiatives which would help with that kind of healing process and moving on, or is that still something that has to be done?
I don't know of any of this kind of initiatives, but they have this inter-religious council the governments have set up for the different religious groups to talk to each other and find ways of cooperation and collaboration. So, but something like what happened in South Africa and all that, I'm not aware of. Maybe Abdullah can tell you something about that. But one thing was, while we were going from Sarajevo to Srebrenica, we saw so many the Serb police officers. They were guarding, all the way, and I don't know whether you know how Bosnia is divided. It's the Republic of Srpska and then the Republic of Bosnia Herzegovina. So there's one part where Srebrenica is. This actually still under the Serb, Bosnian Serbs. And we were told that a lot of these officers who are still in the force, they were involved in these massacres. But no one was tried, and the people feel very bitter about that. And there's one very, very, terrifying story we heard in the khutbah, where one of the Bosnian imams gave, was that during that time a Muslim woman gave birth during the war, and when and it was a baby boy, and as soon as the Serb soldiers saw this, they actually stepped on the baby boy and just killed him. So this kind of horrific stories are still around, and I was talking to the hotel that I was staying in. The person who was working there is a young lady, and I asked her, how old were you during the war? And she said she was about 6 years old, and immediately she started crying. She said, I don't want to talk about the war. She was hurt, her mother was hurt, her father, everybody was affected by that. So people don't want to actually talk about it. So it was such a bitter, horrific experience for most people. Okay.
Well, many Muslims in Europe were shocked at what happened. People were shaken. And I remember growing up and hearing about this war going on and feeling that, well, this is happening to Muslims who are part of the culture. They were white Muslims. They had the same cultural and ethnic heritage. And just because they were Muslims, this was happening. And there was this fear that could we get this kind of hatred in other parts of Europe. It is commemorating events like this helping or hindering? Some people might say that actually it's not going to help move things on if people keep focusing on the bad, or is actually, do you feel that's part of moving on? Unless you acknowledge what's
Yes.
gone on, you cannot move on.